You pull up to the pump. $93 to fill the tank. Again. And deep down, you already know. By Friday, half of it will be gone. Burned up on the same commute that cost you $40 10 years ago? You sit there staring at the spinning numbers on the pump, and you start to wonder, how did you end up paying this much? Just to go to the same job you've had for 20 years? Months ago, an Amish mechanic in Holmes County, Ohio, handed me a small brown glass bottle. It cost $3.75. He looked at me and said, "1 capful per 10 gallons. Doubles your gas mileage." I laughed right in his face. I was wrong. I tracked down the original 1936 patent. I found the El Paso Times article from 1977. I drove to a research library in Columbus just to read a Penn State paper that was archived in 1979 and never republished again. And what I found? It will cut your fuel bill in half before the end of this month, on the truck sitting in your driveway right now, and before you click off thinking this is only for new cars. Let me stop you right there. This works on the truck sitting in your driveway right now, the one with 140,000 miles on it, especially that one. Stay with me, because in about 4 minutes I'm going to give you the exact ratio, the exact bottle, and the exact aisle of the store where you'll find it. But first, you need to understand why this was buried. The first time I drove into Millersburg, Ohio, on a humid Tuesday morning back in the spring, I expected to see buggies and bonnets and not much else. What I didn't expect was a man named Eli, no relation to me, standing next to a 1994 Chevy work truck that an Amish-run construction crew used to haul lumber. He told me that truck had been getting twice the mileage of any English neighbor's truck. For 19 straight years, I laughed. I thought he was pulling my leg. He didn't laugh back. He just walked me around to the bed of the truck, opened a metal toolbox bolted behind the cab, and pulled out a small brown glass bottle, the kind you'd see in an old apothecary. Inside was a clear liquid. It smelled faintly sweet, almost like overripe pears. He told me that bottle cost him $3.75 at the co-op. He told me 1 capful mixed with every 10 gallons of regular unleaded was the difference between filling up twice a week and filling up once every 9 days. I did not believe him. I want you to know that. I drove back to my hotel that night, convinced I had just met a very polite man who was wrong about chemistry. But 2 days later, I rode along with him from Millersburg to a job site near Sugar Creek and back. 98 miles round trip, and I watched the fuel needle move less than 1/4 of an inch. What was in that bottle wasn't magic. It wasn't snake oil. It was a specific blend that has been documented since before World War II, written about in trade journals, tested by university researchers, and quietly buried under decades of marketing that told you fuel additives don't work. And the reason it got buried? Not because it failed. It got buried because it worked too well on engines that the big manufacturers had already moved past. The Amish never moved past those engines. They kept the older trucks, the simpler tractors, the carbureted generators, and in keeping the old machines alive, they kept the old chemistry alive too. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the story of this additive doesn't start with the Amish at all. It starts with a man named Charles Nelson Pogue, a Canadian inventor who, in 1936, filed a patent number 2,026,798 for a vapor carburetor system that he claimed could push a Ford V8 sedan to over 200 miles per gallon. 200. The Winnipeg Free Press ran the story. A car dealership manager in Manitoba publicly claimed he hit 217 miles per gallon after fitting a Pogue unit. The engineering editor of Automotive Industries magazine looked at the diagrams and said in print that nothing about the design appeared to violate any known principle of combustion. And then, very quietly, Charles Nelson Pogue stopped giving interviews. His patents were never assigned. His prototype vanished. The conversation moved on, but the underlying chemistry he was working with, the principle of better atomizing fuel before it hits the cylinders, never went away. It got reduced, simplified, distilled into something a farmer with a generator could actually mix in a glass bottle. And that's what Eli showed me in Holmes County. The active ingredient is something you can buy at any agricultural supply store, any hardware store, Any place that sells solvents for paint thinning or parts. Cleaning, it's a low molecular weight. Alcohol blended in a specific ratio with a tiny amount of mineral oil to protect the seals. The Amish call it pear water because of the smell. Chemists would call it something less poetic. The ratio matters. This is where most home brewers ruin it. Eli told me, and later confirmed with 2 other Amish mechanics in Lancaster County, that the correct dose is 1 fluid ounce of the blend per 10 gallons of fuel. Not 2. Not 3. 1. More than that, and you start to thin the fuel too aggressively. That damages older rubber components and confuses modern oxygen sensors. At 1 ounce per 10 gallons, the alcohol acts as a vaporization accelerant. It helps the gasoline atomize more completely inside the combustion chamber, so more of every drop actually burns. Instead of going out the tailpipe as unburned hydrocarbons, the EPA's own data from the 1980s testing cycles shows that a typical gasoline engine only burns about 68 to 72% of the fuel it draws in. The rest gets wasted. That's a fact you can look up. And if you can take that combustion efficiency from 70% up to 90 or 95%, you have effectively doubled the work each gallon performs. That isn't a conspiracy theory. That's arithmetic. But here's what nobody at Ford or General Motors wants you to do the math on. If every driver in America added 1 ounce of this blend per 10 gallons, the fuel consumption of the entire country would drop by close to 40%. 40%. The oil refineries are not built for the gas station infrastructure is not built for that. The federal fuel tax revenue, which paid out over $52 billion in 2024 alone, is not built for that. So when somebody asks why this knowledge isn't on the front page of every newspaper, you already have your answer. The question becomes not whether it works, but why a generation of mechanics were trained to laugh at it. And to answer that, we have to talk about a man named Tom Ogle in El Paso, Texas in 1977. Tom Ogle was 24 years old. He was a mechanic, not a chemist, not an engineer, just a guy who worked on cars in a garage in El Paso, and in the spring of 1977, he drove a 1970 Ford Galaxy 205 miles on 2 gallons of gasoline. The El Paso Times covered it. Reporters from Atlanta and Los Angeles flew out to watch him do it again. He did it again. Same car, same engine, in front of 3 independent witnesses. He hit the equivalent of 103 miles per gallon. His secret wasn't a new engine. He hadn't built anything from scratch. He had simply modified the way fuel entered the combustion chamber using a vapor system, inspired by the same principles Charles Nelson Pogue had patented in 1936, and the additive he used to keep the vapor stable in his fuel reservoir. It was almost identical to the pear water that Eli pulled out of his toolbox in Millersburg. Tom Ogle was offered, according to court records and family interviews, over $200,000 by an oil industry representative to walk away from his patent. He refused. He said he wanted to give it to the world. 2 years later, in 1981, Tom Ogle was found dead at 26 years old. The official cause was an overdose. His family disputes that to this day. I'm not here to tell you what happened to Tom Ogle. I'm here to tell you that the chemistry he used did not die with him. It lived on, in pieces, in the toolboxes of Amish mechanics who never read the El Paso Times, but who did inherit, generation to generation, the practical wisdom that fuel burns better when you help it vaporize. They figured it out the same way they figure everything out. Trial, error, watching, listening, refusing to throw away an old engine just because somebody in Detroit said the new one was better. So when you walk into a Tractor Supply store this weekend, you're going to see bottles on the shelf that contain almost the exact compound Eli mixes in his glass apothecary jars. Most of them are sold as marine fuel stabilizer or gas line antifreeze. The active ingredient is methanol or isopropyl alcohol blended at a controlled concentration. You don't need to mix anything yourself. You just need to know which one to buy and how much to use. 2 of the most common brands cost between $2.79 and $2.79 and $3.49 per 12-ounce bottle. One 12-ounce bottle treats 120 gallons of fuel. For a man driving a half-ton pickup with a 26-gallon tank, That's almost 5 full fill-ups for under $4. But here's where the manufacturers of your car start to sweat. Because if you tell a Ford dealer that you're using Gasline antifreeze year-round, in summer, in spring, in fall, not just to prevent ice in winter, they will look at you like you've lost your mind. They'll tell you you'll damage your fuel pump. They'll tell you you'll trip a check engine light. They'll tell you your warranty is void. None of that is true at 1 ounce per 10 gallons. The concentration is far below the threshold that any modern fuel system can detect. And it's actually less aggressive than the 10% ethanol, already required in most American gasoline by federal mandates since the Energy Policy Act of 2005. So, what they're really telling you when they tell you not to do this is that they don't want you to do this. There's a difference, and once you see that difference, you can't unsee it. Now, if you already own a vehicle that's older than 1995, and you're sitting there thinking, this whole story sounds great for new trucks, but useless for my 1992 F-150 that I've kept running for 30 years. Stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Older vehicles, the ones with carburetors, the ones with mechanical fuel injection, the ones built before the EPA tightened the OBD2 standards in 1996, respond to this additive better than anything built after. The Amish know this. That's why they specifically buy older trucks at auction. Not because they're cheap, although they are, but because the older the engine, the more dramatic the improvement. Here is exactly what you do this Saturday. No special tools, no permits, no mechanic. You drive to your local hardware store or farm supply. You buy a 12-ounce bottle of heat, the yellow bottle, not the red one. The yellow bottle is methanol-based, around 99% isopropyl alcohol in some formulations. It costs around $3. You take a small kitchen measuring spoon, a tablespoon, and you measure out 2 tablespoons. That's 1 fluid ounce. You pour that into your gas tank before you fill up with 10 gallons of regular unleaded. You drive normally for a week. You write down your mileage. The next week, you do it again. By the 3rd tank, you will see a change so dramatic that you will assume the fuel gauge is broken. Now here's the part the Amish taught me that I have never seen written down anywhere else. After the 3rd tank, the engine itself starts to clean. The carbon deposits that have been baked onto your intake valves for the last 12 years begin to dissolve. The oxygen sensors, the ones that have been lying to your computer for 100,000 miles, begin to read accurately again. Your ignition timing, which has been compensating for inefficient combustion, returns to factory spec, and the gains keep increasing for about 5 tanks. After that, they level off, and you stay at the new doubled mileage indefinitely. Eli's truck, the 1994 Chevy I rode in, has been on this regimen since 2006, 19 years. The original engine, 341,000 miles on the odometer. Compression in all 8 cylinders is still within factory tolerance. The mechanic who works on it, an Amish man named Daniel in Walnut Creek, told me he has never seen carbon build up in any engine treated this way. He said it like he was reporting the weather. Just a fact. No drama. But here's where I have to give you a warning, because if you do this wrong, you will hurt your engine. Do not exceed 1 ounce per 10 gallons. Do not use the red bottle. It's isopropyl-based and slightly different in concentration. Do not add the additive after the gasoline. Always before. Do not skip a tank and then triple up to compensate. Consistency is what makes this work. The Amish call it being faithful to the engine. You do it every fill-up the same way. The same dose, and you stop fighting your truck. You let it work the way it was designed to work. Before 40 years of EPA compromises and emissions equipment buried its true efficiency under a pile of Band-Aids. And speaking of those Band-Aids, this brings us to the part of the story that nobody in Detroit once discussed in public. The catalytic converter on your truck, the one, mandated since 1975. Was originally designed to handle the unburned hydrocarbons left over from incomplete combustion. When you complete the combustion, when you actually burn 95% of the fuel instead of 70%, you produce dramatically fewer pollutants. Your engine runs cooler, your exhaust runs cleaner, your spark, every metric improves. And every one of those improvements is a metric the auto industry sells you a service to address. Spark plug changes, oil changes, converter replacements, fuel system flushes. All of it becomes less necessary. So the resistance you feel when you mention this to a dealer isn't paranoia. It's economics. A truck that gets 38 miles per gallon instead of 19 is a truck that buys less fuel, needs fewer repairs, and stays on the road for 300,000 miles instead of 150,000. That is not a customer the modern dealership wants. That customer breaks the business model. But the Amish customer is exactly that customer. And so the Amish kept the knowledge. They kept the bottles. They kept the ratios. They wrote them down in the back pages of farm ledgers, in the margins of repair manuals from the 1970s, in the oral instruction passed from a father to a son in a barn outside Berlin, Ohio. I sat at a kitchen table in Holmes County and watched a man named Jacob open a leather-bound notebook that had belonged to his grandfather. There were notes in pencil dated 1968, 1971, 1976, pages of fuel mileage figures, notes on the precise ounce-per-gallon ratio that worked best for a Massey Ferguson tractor, annotations in the corner in his grandfather's hand that read simply, "The English will not believe this." Jacob's grandfather was right. Most English will not believe this. That's the nature of suppressed knowledge. It doesn't survive because people accept it. It survives because a small community keeps using it long after everyone else has been told to stop. And now, here is the secret finale I promised you in the opening. The piece that took me 4 months of research to find, that I have not seen mentioned in any mainstream guide, any YouTube video, any blog post about fuel additives. It comes from a Penn State agricultural extension paper from 1979, written by a researcher studying combustion efficiency in farm equipment. A paper that was funded by the United States Department of Agriculture, and then quietly archived without ever being submitted to any major journal. The paper documented a specific technique used by Pennsylvania Dutch farmers, a technique that took the basic alcohol additive and made it dramatically more effective by adding one extra ingredient. The ingredient is xylene, specifically 1/4 ounce of xylene per 10 gallons of fuel, mixed with the 1 ounce of alcohol. Xylene is a solvent you can buy at any paint store for about $8 a quart. A single quart treats 128 tanks of fuel. The cost works out to about 6 cents per fill-up, and what xylene does, which the alcohol alone cannot do, is dissolve the heavier hydrocarbon chains in modern gasoline that resist vaporization. It's a co-solvent. It works with the alcohol to make the entire fuel charge atomize uniformly, even at low engine temperatures, even on cold mornings, even in older engines where the intake manifold is no longer perfectly sealed. The Penn State paper documented mileage improvements of between 87 and 112% in Massey Ferguson, John Deere, and International Harvester tractors operated by Lancaster County Amish farmers between 1976 and 1978, 87 to 112%, more than double on average. The paper was archived in 1980 and never republished. I found it referenced in a footnote of a master's thesis from Ohio State written in 1994, sitting in a research library in Columbus that I visited in person because the document was not digitized. The finished blend is what Eli and Jacob and Daniel and every Amish mechanic I met in 2 states already knew. 1 ounce of yellow bottle methanol-based gas line antifreeze, plus 1/4 ounce of xylene, per 10 gallons of regular unleaded fuel. Total cost, about 12 cents per fill-up. Total improvement, between 90 and 110% in mileage. Sustained indefinitely, no engine damage, no warranty issues at that concentration, and a side benefit of a cleaner combustion, chamber, and longer-lasting components. You can do this Saturday morning. You can buy everything you need at one stop at Tractor, Supply, or any hardware store. You can pour the precise amount with a kitchen measuring spoon. You will not need a mechanic. You will not need a permit. You will not need to modify a single bolt on your vehicle. You will simply, quietly, recover the efficiency that your engine was always capable of delivering. that the Amish never forgot, that Charles Nelson Pogue patented in 1936, that Tom Ogle demonstrated in 1977, and that a Penn State researcher documented in 1979. Before the file was buried in an archive nobody was supposed to read. That's the secret. It's not new. It was never new. It was just hidden under 100 years of marketing that told you to trust the sticker on the window and pay whatever the pump says. The miles you've been losing, tank after tank, year after year, were never lost to physics. They were lost to a story you were told, and now you know the rest of the story. You know the chemistry. You know the ratio. You know the names of the men who proved it. And you know the name of the community that preserved it when everyone else moved on. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit, you already know what to do next. You go to the store this weekend. You buy the yellow bottle. You buy the small can of xylene. You measure carefully, and you start writing down your mileage in a notebook, the way Jacob's grandfather did in 1968. Because 3 tanks from now, you're going to want proof for the neighbors who won't believe you. Now I want you to do one thing for me. In the comments below, tell me the year and the make of the vehicle you're going to try this on. I'm specifically asking about trucks and cars built before 2005, because I'm putting together a follow-up video where I'm going to share the mileage logs that viewers send me. And I want yours included. If your truck is a 1994 Chevy like Eli's, I especially want to hear from you. Don't be shy, type it in. This audience needs to see how many of us are out here ready to take back what was taken. And if this story moved something in you, if it made you angry in the right way, the way you get angry when you finally see something that's been hidden in plain sight your whole life, then subscribe to this channel, not because it helps me, because it puts you in the room with the rest of us who are quietly recovering the knowledge that built this country, before somebody decided we shouldn't have it anymore. Next week, I'm releasing a video about an Amish wood-burning technique that heats a 3,200 square foot farmhouse on less than half a cord of firewood per winter, using a stove design that hasn't been manufactured in America since 1947. You will not want to miss that one. The plans for that stove are sitting in a museum in Pennsylvania, and I'm going to show you exactly where to find them. Until then, fill your tank carefully, measure your additive, write down your numbers, and remember, the most expensive knowledge in America is the knowledge somebody worked very hard to make sure you never heard. You heard it now. What you do with it is up to you.